How's it going, folks? Today we're talking about my May walleye opener setup and how to use them and when to use them appropriately. So let's start off by where you find walleye. The walleye have moved out of the river from their spawning flats and they're now making their way onto the first staging locations. These locations would be your river mouths, the shallow sand flats, offshore humps and points, and if you have weeds in your lake, the weed edges will be the where to look. The top 3 key tips I can give you are location. You got to find out where these walleye are. You know that they're going to be in the shallow areas somewheres, but you have to make sure that you're on the walleye and not just thinking that the walleye are going to be around you. 2 is find the bait, find the fish. Around this time, you're going to have a lot of bait in the shallows, so if you're going to be around bait, you're probably going to be around the walleye, which is a good indication that you're in the right location. And 3 is match the hatch, both in size and profile. So that's why if I find that the walleye are chasing shiners, I'll stick to the jig and paddle tail plastic. Whereas if I find that they're starting to get a little more aggressive and they're starting to chase bigger profiles, that's when I start bulking up to bigger profile baits in the 5-inch plastic range. So my lure system is pretty simple. I start off with baits that are aggressive and I work my way down to baits that are finesse, and then from finesse I work back up into those aggressive style baits. So let's start with the first search bait, and that is the 1/4 ounce aspirin jig head with a 4-inch plastic. Doesn't matter what you use. You can use a fluke tail, you can use a pintail style, even a boot tail if you wanted, but you want to use a 1/4 ounce jig. This is your kind of happy medium between letting the bait fall down slowly but also making proper bottom contact in those shallow waters. The reason I use the 1/4 ounce aspirin jig head and 4-inch plastics is because I can work these baits one of 2 ways. I can work this like a Ned rig, or I can work this more like a natural jigging plastic or jigging minnow style. So what I mean by that is I'm usually going to start this bait off by jigging aggressively. So I'm going to be doing snap jigging techniques and just trying to power fish the area as fast as I can to search the area out. When I notice that the fish aren't biting that fast aggressive technique, then that's when I start slowing down into like the Ned rig styles where I'm dragging the jig on the bottom and trying to keep that bottom contact at all times. So next on the list is the 3/8 ounce Kalen's Rattling Eye ball jig head with a 3.5 to 4-inch plastic. The reason why this is next on my list, if the snapping jig presentation isn't working, then this one I can work with a steady retrieve or a slow steady retrieve, keeping that bait within the strike zone a little bit longer, whether that be right on bottom or in the mid water column. This gives the fish a little more time to keep in line with the bait before it goes for an ambush strike. So this bait's a really effective bait for searching out a lot of water quick, but also maintaining the right strike zone for a longer period of time. So continuing going down the list from the 3/8 ounce Kalen's Rattling Eye jig head with the 4-inch plastic, we're going to switch over to the slip float stuff now. So this is getting at the bottom of the ladder system. So typical slip float, and this is going to be on a St. Croix Triumphant. I believe this is a 7'2" medium light fast action. The reason for this is because if those other 2 techniques haven't worked, the fish are already in a neutral lethargic state, so you're not going to be able to get them to bite necessarily at those times. This is why I pull it to float, because the float I can put onto a location where the fish are at, and I can just hover that bait in front of their face until they're ready to eat. The other thing with this float, like I mentioned in my first walleye seminar, is that this acts as a really quick way to tell where the fish are and what the fish's mood is, because it acts as a sonar. So that's going down the list. So you're going from the 1/4 ounce and 4-inch plastic to the 3/8 ounce and paddle tail, down to your last rod being the slip float setup. And now you want to go back up. So the next rod you're going to use is going to be the power corking setup. So the reason why I say that is I'm using the exact same 1/4 ounce and pintail plastic for this. I prefer to use the pintail plastic because you're not going to be able to move this bait a whole lot, but you can twitch it. So having that pintail presentation allows that tail to just sit there and move just a little bit to keep the walleye keyed in on it. This is on a Fenwick HMX. I believe this is a 7-foot medium fast. The reason why this is going to be your one up from the float is because you can do all the same techniques you were doing with the slip float, but you have the same bait as the 1/4 ounce and 4-inch plastic pintail. Now, not only do you have the same bait as your next option, but you're also going to be able to move this bait a little bit more than you would with the slip float. So you can do twitching, you can do small pops, 1-2 pops. So that gives you a little more options to make a reaction strike than just waiting for a reaction strike. So from using the power corking setup, this is going back up again. This is when I start going back into the snap jigging presentations again. So that's going back to your 1/4 ounce jig head and 4-inch plastic. This is when you can start doing a little more harder pops because you already done the pops on the power corking setup, and you know that they're willing to chase a little bit. Now you have a better idea of where and how aggressively you can pop this jig and where the fish are kind of sitting in that water column. So you know if they're at the bottom, you keep it close to the bottom doing jig dragging. If you know they're in the middle of the water column, then you can do a little bit harder pops or higher pops. So from there, that's when I go back into the 3/8 ounce jig head and 4-inch paddle tails. Instead of just slow rolling this bait, this is when I'm starting to straight retrieve and doing a couple more twitches and pops. You can also do lift hop techniques with this. You can do a lot of the jigging techniques you're doing with the 1/4 ounce jig head and 4-inch plastic. You can do the same on this one too. So that's when I go back up to this one and start going a little bit more aggressive with this bait instead. So if you're actively catching fish on the 1/4 ounce jig head and 4-inch plastic, and you're catching consistently with the 3/8 ounce ball jig and 4-inch plastic or paddle plastic, that's when I start profile bulking my baits. So from those two rods going up still, we're going into bigger plastics for snap jigging. So here we've got a 3/8 ounce smelt and air jig head with a 5-inch Z-Min scented jerk shad. And this is on my Shimano SLX 7-foot medium extra fast with a Pissy Fun Carbon 2 2000 series. Reason why I go up is that way I can start sorting out the quality fish from the smaller juveniles, so like the 15s to the 18-inch range, and then this one specifically for the 20 plus range. You're going to be doing the same techniques, either snap jigging or lift hops, or if you want you can jig drag this, but for the most part if they're aggressive they're not going to be on bottom. From the 3/8 ounce smelt and air jig head and 5-inch plastic, that's when we start going into bass territory, and we start ripping around the original Z-Man Chatterbait with the 4-inch paddle tail plastic. So this is on my Shimano SLX 7'2" medium heavy fast action bait casting rod. This is a Pissy Fun Torrent 2. The reason why this is the last bait on the list is because you're already caught fish on the snap jigging presentation and they're easily crushing that. You can catch fish on the swim bait presentation because they're easily eating that also. This is strictly for profile bulking and sorting out those lesser juveniles and those higher quality 20-inch fish. So yet again, you're going to do the same techniques as you were with the 3/8 ounce ball jig and 4-inch paddle tail. You're going to do the same techniques, either slow rolling this or straight retrieve. Or the one thing I found that really works well for this bait is just doing a straight retrieve and stopping. So you give it 1 or 2 cranks and then kill the bait, like just stop it, and then let it fall down a little bit, and then pick it back up by retrieving it in again. Every time you do that stop, you're going to give that walleye a second to ambush that bait and put it into his mouth. That's the one trick I can give you for this, is just to let that bait have a moment or two to pause in the water. And there you have it. That's my May walleye opener ladder system. So let's go over it again. So first you're going to start with your 1/4 ounce aspirin jig head and 4-inch fluke tail plastic. From there you're going to go to the 3/8 ounce ball jig and 4-inch paddle tail plastic, dropping down to the slip flow technique, going back up into the power corking technique, back to the 1/4 ounce and 4-inch fluke style plastic, and then into the 3/8 ounce ball jig head and paddle tail option, up into the 3/8 ounce and 5-inch fluke plastic, and then into your chatterbait setup. And there you have it. That's my complete ladder system for May post spawn walleye, and I'll catch you guys next time.